Making Comics 101, Issue 10, Reference. Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where together we are going to create some awesome comics, because this is Making Comics 101 today. This is issue 10. We're up to the double digits. We're talking about reference. We're getting close. I know all you guys are probably waiting for the drawing part, but we're getting super close to that. But all this other stuff that we've been talking about is super important, and reference is important too. And the one thing I do want to say about reference is there's this opinion that kind of goes around that sometimes I hear, mostly from, to be honest, younger, more inexperienced artists, that you shouldn't use reference, that, you know, it's cheating or something like that. But honestly, you don't hear a lot of that from the pros. So I just want to tell you, from somebody that's been doing this for a while, there is nothing wrong with using reference. I use reference all the time. I mean, you just can't, especially when we're doing comics where the goal or the task is we've got to draw all kinds of different things. It's not like one thing. Some people, they say if you're a wildlife artist, you paint wildlife and you know how to do that. But with comics, you may have to paint or draw wildlife and then draw a cityscape and then draw, you know, any number of different things, because that's what story is. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that happen in stories and happen in comics. I mean, I guess if you're creating your own comics, you can kind of pick and choose the subject matter, and if you want to kind of stick with a certain thing. I know some people, they hate drawing cityscapes and stuff like that, so what they'll do is they'll have like a quest, like a Lord of the Rings type story where it all takes place out in the open, because maybe they're more comfortable drawing natural things or whatever. I'd stretch your boundaries. I wouldn't be afraid to learn how to draw other things. And sometimes I'd have people come to me like, oh, can you draw this? And it's like, yeah, I mean, I can kind of draw anything. I mean, I may not draw it better than, you know, everyone else. Anything I can see that I can visualize, I can draw, especially if I have reference to help me, because there are things that I've had to draw that what is that? I don't know what that looks like. Well, I'll look it up, look for some reference, and then I can go off of that. And once we get into more the penciling areas and the drawing, we'll talk more about how you can learn to draw other things other than just, I think mostly with comics when we're first getting in, we concentrate more on the human figure because that's a big part of our stories, but there's so many other elements that we need to learn how to draw. We don't always know how to draw that, so we need to use reference. So don't be afraid to use reference. In this episode, I'm going to break it down into two different sections, and they both begin with R's, and you know, because we're talking about reference. So the first thing we want to talk about is research. So what do you use to research things that maybe you're not that familiar with drawing, or maybe you need to brush up on things? And the first, I mean, there's so many different ways to go about this, and different stuff that we can gather that we can use for a reference. But I always go back to the old standby of books, because I've got a fairly big collection of books, and I don't know, there's something I like about having those tangible references. And we'll get into all the different areas. Of course, you can do your quick Google image search and things like that, and we'll talk about some of those ways too, because that's usually the easiest to find. The problem with that though is the stuff you're searching for, more than likely that's the beginning search result, unless you dive really super deep. And the problem with using just, you know, Google image search and things like that to find things to learn how to draw is that you're getting the same search results as pretty much everyone in the world. So a lot of people are using that same stuff. The things that you're referencing might tend to look, you know, a little more pedestrian or more common, and you want to say, oh yeah, I think you took that particular pose or that particular thing from this because I've seen it all over the internet. So that's something you have to, even though we have this great resource where we can, I mean, I remember when I first started doing comics, I didn't have that. I'll talk about some of the methods and things that I use, but you know, we didn't have where we could just Google something and find it right away. We had to sort of collect that stuff or you know, go out and find it. But now it's so easy to do that. So it's definitely a plus, and it's definitely, I mean, I don't want to dissuade anyone from doing that, because I do that all the time. But you just got to be a little careful. But with books, it's a little different, because not everyone uses books anymore. And I mean, if you've got like an older book that most people aren't even familiar with or whatever, so that's something I think maybe that's something we should start thinking about, more tangible sources of media that we can use for our reference. So I'm going to talk about some of my favorite books that I use for reference, and right off the bat, my all-time favorite. Now, I think some of these are available online now. Like I said, I always kind of start off with books. So these are what's known as visual dictionaries, and these are two of the most popular ones, or the ones that I use, and I use them both. They're both put out by different companies, and they're both good for different reasons, and I'll explain why. And this one is, you know, you can see how much I use some of this stuff. It is like falling apart and everything, but especially back in the day, I would use this all the time. This is the Macmillan Visual Dictionary. And I would imagine you can probably find these used, or maybe even in a Goodwill or something like that, because books are easy. Older books are easier to find now because, you know, people are they're trying to condense and not have, you know, take up so much space with this stuff. But basically, a visual dictionary is just what it sounds like. I mean, it is just the Macmillan one is actually like illustrations, more sort of vector style illustrations, whether it's clothing, you know, electronics, musical instruments, tools. And the great thing about these is not only does it show you a picture of what this stuff is, but it's all annotated. So if you need to know in your story what different parts of something is, like, what is this, a pommel horse or something? I don't know anything about gymnastics, but if I need to know something specific, what something's called, I can just look, and it's all referenced here. And because it is illustrated, it's kind of the best example. Now, some of these are out of date. Like if you look up, like say maybe, I don't know, a helicopter in here, it's going to have your basic helicopter. Now, nowadays, this is an older book, so nowadays if you look up a helicopter, I mean, technology advances and things look different. Same thing with cars or whatever, but this is going to have sort of your basic example. And sometimes that's what you want. You want to strip down everything to its basics. So the Macmillan Visual Dictionary, awesome. I use that all the time. I think, like I said, I think this might be available online if you look for that. Now, the other one is put out by DK. Now, I'll talk about DK in a little bit, and I'm not sure if they're still in business. I thought I think they like went under, but maybe somebody bought them out, because I still see DK books all the time. So I'm not sure about that. But this Dorling Kindersley, all right, so most people just call it DK. You can see that, you've probably seen that logo all over the place. They do all kinds of you know, different sorts of visual dictionaries. But now the difference with this one is it's all photographs. So, you know, you've got whatever the case is, like more realistic versions of the body, or musical instruments, cutaways, all that kind of stuff. So you've got, Macmillan is more like illustrated, this is more like photographic. Speaking of helicopters, so you can see, so that's sort of an older version of a helicopter. But yeah, and it just names everything in here. This may be available online as well, but these are just great. Almost anything I could think to draw is probably in here. And it might even spark ideas. And you can do further research online if you find something that's like, well, I kind of know what that's called now, but that's not the exact one I look at. And then you can dive a little deeper. And the deeper you dive on the internet, like I said, the more your stuff isn't going to look like everything else that people might be drawing. Another thing I use to inspire me, and there's also a difference between just looking at, so like with the visual dictionaries, you can kind of look at that stuff and you can pretty much draw it the way it is, because it's pretty basic. Now, if you want inspiration, then you can look at, like, you know, art of books. This is the art of Star Wars. So this is definitely going to give you, you know, some inspiration, like kind of see how that stuff came together. And there's a lot of ideas and things that they didn't end up using that, you know, maybe you could say, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I could take that and use it for one of my characters since they didn't use it or whatever, or just combine different things. Another one that's real cool if you're into cars or like post-apocalyptic stuff is the art of Mad Max. I've got tons of these. For animation, I've got tons of the Disney art of books. So these are really great. And also, like I said, the DK books, you know, Star Wars has, there's visual dictionaries specifically for like Star Wars, and they'll break stuff down like that, and that can give you ideas. But obviously, with that kind of stuff, you don't want to just take it whole cloth. You want to, you know, let that inspire you. Here's another really good book. Now, this is sort of an art of book for a production that doesn't really exist. This was by, I can't remember if it was, it's a major school, whether it was Art Center or Cal Arts or something like that. I'm not sure. They basically came up with the idea based on an old fairy tale, The Skillful Huntsman, and they created a movie, you know, concepts, all these concept designs. If you're a concept designer, you've probably heard of this book, but it's all these really cool concepts for something that never really appeared on film. So there's tons of things in here that can help inspire you to create stuff for your own comics. Now, going further into some of the books that I use, because most of the stories that I like to tell are more period pieces. They take place in a different time. Young and the Dead takes place in the 80s. I've done things that take place in the 70s. But if you're telling something that takes place in a different time, I've got books like this is, Rolling Stone, the 70s. So you can kind of see, some of the fashions and some of the trends and things and styles and all that were in the 70s. Or, like this one is the look of the century. So if you want to say, whatever decade you want to go into, you can look at some like the furnishings. Like if you need to draw a room and furnish it, there's old jukeboxes and things like that. All these books that kind of just look back at what was popular or whatever before. Now, popular is the key, because when you do use these books, you're going to get a lot of, like if you're trying to draw characters and styles from certain areas, a lot of those books are just kind of what was popular with maybe like culture you would see on television, like the most popular stuff, and not necessarily what the average person might be wearing or using. So for that, one thing that I like to use is, and now these are mine because I'm old. So I've got, and my story takes place back, in the 80s, back when I was a kid. So I've got old, like this is my junior high school yearbook from back in the 80s. This is back in 86. And then my high school yearbook, I think this is from 90. But you can look at these, and this will give you a little better understanding. And because it's the same age as my kids in my story, you can see that realistically what some of the hairstyles and things look like. And some of the fashions, and it's just not like back in the 80s when, say, Madonna was popular or something. She had a very unique style, and some people did mimic that, but most people didn't like dress like that. But if you look at pictures, like if you search 80s fashion on the internet, you're going to get a lot of that kind of stuff that was a little too stylized for what actual people were wearing. So I use old yearbooks, and you can probably find these super cheap because people just, what am I going to do with these? I don't care about this anymore or whatever. Or somebody passes away or something like that, and they get donated. So, and no one else is going to really want these because they're not thinking about, oh, these would be good references, but they do make good references. So you can find that kind of stuff. And maybe you can search for yearbook pictures online and things like that as well. But my bookshelf is filled with just all kinds of really cool stuff. And again, a lot of the stuff I just use for inspiration, for fantasy. I mean, some of my favorite illustrators, I'll get inspired from them. This is Tony D. Terlizzi, who does, he does like the Spiderwick Chronicles, very awesome like fantasy painter, watercolor and stuff like that. And this is the kind of the Spiderwick Chronicles field guide. So you can kind of see like different versions of, mystical creatures and cryptids and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So that's a good one. I like, fantastical stuff. Like whenever I go, if I get a chance to go to Disneyland, a lot of times I'll just go and take pictures and things, and we'll talk about that too. But just the imagination that goes into the creation of Disneyland and the land and things, that's why I look at, stuff like, and you can see again how much I've used this book, but this is the Walt Disney Imagineering book, and it basically shows you how they came up with a lot of the concepts for the rides and all the attractions and things like that at Disneyland. So and some of this stuff wasn't actually used, and you can maybe get some ideas from that. Again, favorite artists or even film directors and other creative people. Like this is a book, Guillermo del Toro. If you're a fan of del Toro, I mean, this is basically his actual art collection. I was fortunate enough to go see this exhibit and see a lot of this stuff in person. But if you're a fan of like the macabre or whatever, I mean, some of the artwork and stuff that he collects, I mean, just look at what other people are into. This isn't just one person's work. This is tons of different people's work that one particular person is a fan of and collects, and you can kind of see, oh, that's cool. That's what inspired them to create something, and you can use that to help inspire what you're creating. Now, let's say you don't have a big collection of books, and books in general, like I said, you can go to like thrift stores and stuff and find them relatively inexpensively. Sometimes some of the art books and things, they can be a little pricey, but libraries exist. We can get out and do research the old-fashioned ways at libraries and just go through and find things that way. And so don't be afraid to get out, go to your local library, do some research there. You're gonna find some different stuff that you're not gonna necessarily find online. Also, don't be afraid to get out in the real world and experience the surroundings surroundings in your own backyard. Or, you know, if you're traveling, you take note of some of the stuff out there. You can go to zoos and Disney animators do this all the time, where they'll go to a zoo, they'll sit out there with their sketchbook, and they'll do sketches based on the animals and things like that. If you look at something like a movie like Star Wars that has all these crazy, fantastical worlds and everything, a lot of those are based on reality. And that's what they do. They go out and do location shoots and everything. They check out these actual places like Tunisia, where Tatooine was based. You know, so they'll go out, you know, to Africa, and they'll find these places, and they'll go and film there, because it's something we don't always see. Now, we probably don't have the opportunity to travel to Africa or things like that. You know, if you've got like backwoods or depending on where you live, there's all kinds of things that you can take note of, and maybe that'll help inspire you. Like the underground lair here is located in the American Southwest, so you know, without going too far, we can find these really cool mountains, kind of like that you've seen on maybe some of the basically like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, that type of stuff. You're going to see that out here, but so maybe that can help inform your story. But get out in the real world, check things out, and just pay attention to the world around you. You're going to get a lot of really cool inspiration from that. And going back to books for a minute, one thing that I mentioned before is that one of the main things that we draw in comics are heroes. So don't be afraid to use books for reference for drawing your figures. Obviously some classics, Bridgman's Anatomy, classic. These are really old books. But they're just great for learning anatomies. If you want something a little more dynamic, dynamic drawing series by Bern Hogarth, who was an artist on Tarzan. The only thing you have to worry about a little bit with some of his stuff is it is super, you know, if you're not using, like, you got to pay attention to like gestures and things like that, because if you're just looking at the drawing, it might tend to look a little stiff, so you got to watch out about this. And his characters are, I mean, they're super muscle bound. They're very, you know, they're awesome for comics, but you've kind of got to learn the basics and stuff, and we'll get into that more with penciling. But he's got a whole series of dynamic drawings, Bern Hogarth. Another thing, you know, for like wildlife or whatever, there is a company called Dover, and they basically put out what is, you know, public domain drawings from way back, like woodcuts and things like this. So look at this. This is one with just animals. All of this, and you could physically actually, you could take these drawings and you could actually put them in your book if you want. I don't know why you would do that, but these are all royalty free. You can actually use the actual artwork. This is all stuff that's in the public domain. If I use it just for reference, if I need to draw, like, you know, because it's super realistic, and you don't always get these great poses in real life. So I mean, this is a great series, and Dover puts out all kinds of kind of clip art, you know, old-fashioned books like this. But beyond using books for references and things like that, one of the really great things, and again, animators do this all the time, use yourself as a reference, especially for like facial expressions. You should get like a mirror like this. So I've got this mirror here, and I think you can find these at IKEA. I think that's where I got it. I assume they still have it, but this is like a makeup mirror. But you can put this on your art desk, and it can swivel around, you can turn it and everything, and just look at it and, like, you know, make expressions or whatever, and then you can kind of get ideas for that. Animators use that all the time. So a mirror is a great form of reference, and even like a little pocket, like if you got girls or whatever, if you got a purse, or if you've got like a man bag or something, just put a little tiny compact mirror in there. So if you're out doing sketching, you can, if you need to, like, oh, what would the expression be with a person if they're kind of like, if they smell like a weird, you know, like that, and then just use that. You can use mirrors a lot for facial expressions. Another thing I've done in the past, sometimes I'll just set up a camera and I'll just make my own poses and use those. Or if you have somebody that you can use as a model, maybe ask if you can take some pictures of other people. And there are resources out there of models in different positions and action poses and things like that. And sometimes I found that no matter how many of those are out there, sometimes it's difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. So if you can't find that, then just take your own picture. And it's so easy to do that, you know, now with you've got a phone. So don't be afraid to take pictures of yourself or others or whatever with their permission, and use those for reference. Another thing is there are apps out there that have like poser apps where you can take and you can move these digital bodies around and make poses, and you can spin it around from different angles. Those are great for references. You got to kind of understand the basics, because otherwise your stuff might be a little stiff, but and we'll get into that in penciling, but those poser apps are great. So we talked about research, and the next big R that we're going to talk about in regards to reference is record. So we should start recording things that we can use later for our reference. Whether that is if you find, pictures online, you can create a digital file folder, the best images that you think you might need. Something that I use a lot is Pinterest. Pinterest is great for compiling different photographs, different themes. You can create certain boards, like I've got a board for Young and the Dead. I put all, any kind of reference that I need, old stuff from the 80s, different poses, all that stuff. And if you're working on a project and you don't want it to be public yet, you can make your boards so no one else can see them but you, private boards. Or you can make them in public and you can share that out to other people, and other people can use those. And yeah, I do that all the time. I use Pinterest quite a bit. It's like probably nowadays it's like one of my favorite ways to collect resources and things that I use for my comics. So that's an easy way to keep a record of some of the stuff that you want to use for your projects. The other thing is, we've all got this little tiny camera, computer device in our pocket. There's no reason why we can't go around and take pictures. And I mentioned before the mirror, if you don't have a mirror on you, you can just turn on the camera and take a photograph of yourself, or even just look at the camera the same way you would a mirror. Or if it's off, you've got a little black mirror that you can use. You see a reflection in there. But yeah, take photographs when you're out and about. If there's something cool like, oh, I could use that, you've got this thing in your pocket, take a picture of it and then start keeping a record. And of course you can create folders or whatever, or upload them or whatever to your desktop and create folders on your desktop and just organize everything like that. Another way to record stuff is keep a journal, and you can, same thing, you can take physical photographs and put that in, drawings, almost like a scrapbook of different references for like this particular project. Like if I wanted to create, I do my books about zombies, if I find pictures of zombies or sketches or whatever, you can keep those all in a sketchbook, and then you can refer back to it when you need it. So that's a great way to record, is just a physical notebook that you can either stuff other things in it or just use your own drawings and your own sketches and things like that. Now, back in the day, what we did, and I still have one of these, I don't refer to it as much, but it's a good way to record if you have a bunch of physical media. I used to go through like magazines and just, oh, that's cool, and rip it out, and then I would keep what they call a morgue. And it's basically just, mine is like a file cabinet with different folders for different whatever. Like I might have, if it's a particular project, I might have a folder labeled for that project and puts things in there. It's been a while since I've used it, so I'm trying to remember all the different categories I had. But I've got all these different folders with these different drawings. Like if I, space exploration, and I'll have a folder in here with different things from space. Or, I had one that was like, maybe I was doing something like a medical thing, and I would have different versions of x-rays and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But just, you can still do that. You can still keep a physical morgue, but you can also do that digitally nowadays too. Again, with just files on your computer, and keep those digital files. Just make sure that it's organized so you can keep track of it. And one other thing that I do, a lot of people have a really hard time with drawing hands and things, and that's one of the hardest things to draw. Just drawing a hand by itself is hard enough. Drawing a hand doing things or holding different things, that's difficult too. So a lot of times I'll hold out my hand, I'm right-handed, so a lot of times if I'll be able to do something I'll look at my left hand and I'll draw, but I can't, if I need to hold up my right hand, I can't do that while I'm drawing. So if I have a character who's holding a particular gun or a weapon or something like that, or a pencil or whatever it is, and I need to have them holding it in their right hand, and because I'm right-handed, I can't hold it and draw at the same time. So just take a snapshot of that and then use that as a reference. There's all kinds of ways that you can, your own photographs and things, and there's tricks and things that you can use. I usually, any photo that I take, I usually convert to black and white, because usually with comics, we're drawing the line art. Later on, we'll get into color. For just the drawing portion, we're doing black and white line art. So this helps a lot with shadows and things like that. Sometimes I'll just take the contrast down a little bit, bump up those blacks and everything, and that'll kind of give you an idea, some good reference for how shadows fall and things like that. Again, this is all stuff we'll get into pencils, which is coming up. I know you guys are waiting, but I think that's pretty much all I have to talk about as far as reference goes. But I want to know, is there something that you guys use for reference that I didn't cover on the show? Let me know in the comments section. And you know, like I said, we're getting close to that drawing, so we'll see you. I think next week we're going to start talking about penciling, so that should be fun. But I'll see you guys next week. That is all. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.